His First Nations name, Kagwege, literally meant everything. Very fitting for a runner who could dominate an entire race from the front of the pack or rely on his tremendous kick to pull from behind in the final stretch. He broke records, won Boston in a snowstorm, and utilized training methods that were decades ahead of their time, all while fighting systematic racism that threatened even the production of this very podcast. Today is Friday, July 4th, 2025, and on this day in 1886, Thomas Charles Longboat was born on the Six Nations Reserve near the city of Brantford, Ontario. I am both excited and a little worked up to talk to you about Tom Longboat, who he was, what he did, and why he matters to our sport. First, I'll tell y'all about Longboat, and then we'll hear from his great-great-grandson, who is literally running in Longboat's footsteps over a century later. I'm your host, Running Up That Hillary, and you are listening to Today in Running History. Why, might you be wondering, am I so agitated? It's because here we have this very important and not at all obscure figure in running history, and getting his story right should matter. But finding accurate information has been tough. We are in the early days of this podcast, and in my research so far, I am already seeing that some stories, especially those belonging to women or people of color or belonging to other marginalized groups, have not always been treated with appropriate care and respect. As a result, they're in danger of being lost forever. The more an alternate fact is repeated, the more it's accepted. So I am going to try very hard to get this right. Thomas Charles Longboat was born on this day in 1886. Or was it 1887? On the Six Nations of the Grand River Reserve in southern Ontario. He was a member of the Wolf Clan of Onondaga Nation, where he was known by his native name, Kagwege. Tom's father died when Tom was 3 or maybe 5, leaving Tom's mother struggling to care for him and his 2, or was it 3, siblings on the family's small farm. One story says that as an 8-year-old, he raced and beat his mother's wagon 40 kilometers, or was it 65? When he was 12 or maybe 13, Tom was taken from his family and forced to live at the Mohawk Institute Residential School in Brantford, where he was pressured to give up his language, his culture, and his religious practices. The food was so bad that the students nicknamed the dining area the Mush Hall. The first time he ran away, Tom was caught and brought back, but he eventually escaped for good, hiding out at his uncle's farm where he'd be harder to find. It was around this time that another resident of the Six Nations Reserve was making international headlines in the small yet respected distance running scene. On Patriots' Day in 1901, Bill Davis, an indigenous Canadian of the Mohawk Nation, placed second at the 5th annual Boston Marathon with a time of 2:34:45. Davis's accomplishment got teenage Longboat's attention and was the first time that Longboat considered running for sport, instead of just away from cruel conditions. Once again, sources vary wildly on when exactly Tom Longboat began his running career, but most agree that his first official race was a 5-miler in Caledonia, Ontario on Victoria Day, 1905. He placed second and soon after began training under Bill Davis. His first win was the following year at the 31-ish kilometer Around the Bay road race in nearby Hamilton. Fun fact about this race, it is the oldest road race in all of North America and has been held nearly every year since 1894. The next iteration will be on April 12th, 2026, when the race will celebrate its 132nd anniversary. It will also be the 120th anniversary of Longboat's 1906 win. So if you are looking for a fun spring race with a lot of history, Around the Bay is definitely worth checking out. The following spring, Tom Longboat prepared to run the Boston Marathon, which would be his first international race as well as his first full marathon. The weather that year was brutal, with some sources calling it a snowstorm and others referring to it as sleet. And despite the weather, Longboat ran the 1907 Boston Marathon in just a cotton singlet and shorts, along with the thin leather running shoes that everyone wore in those days. Longboat did not hold the lead right out the gate, and when the group passed through Natick, he was in ninth place. It was at that point that he and the rest of the lead group just barely made it across a set of railroad tracks when a freight train came through, meaning everyone behind them had to wait several minutes at a complete standstill before picking the race back up. When the group reached Wellesley around the halfway point, Tom Longboat began making his move, picking off runners one by one until he was in fourth place. Then came the Newton Hills, which is where Longboat passed the final three runners to take the lead. An article from the Boston Globe published the day after this race said that while his competitors struggled through the final hills on the course, to Longboat, quote, the sight of them seemed to be like a visit of the spirit of rejuvenation. By the time he crested that final peak, no other runners were even in sight anymore. Longboat won the race in a course record of 2 hours, 24 minutes, and 24 seconds, a full half mile in front of the man in second place, and nearly 5 minutes faster than the previous record. After his win, Longboat told the Boston Globe that he was satisfied with his win, though warmer weather would have made his record even faster. He also said that he would never run the Boston Marathon again, instead devoting his efforts to preparing for the marathon at the 1908 Olympics. Tom Longboat was true to his word, and the 1907 Boston Marathon was the only time he ever ran that race. But this past spring, 118 years after Longboat's win, his great-great-grandson, Kristian Jameson, took those same streets and competed in the Boston Marathon. I am thrilled to welcome Kristian to Today in Running History to talk about his experience there and the legacy of his great-great-grandfather. All right, I am here with Kristian Jameson, who is the great-great-grandson of Tom Longboat. How are you today, Kristian?
I'm doing great, Hillary. Thank you for having me. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. So tell me about your family. What did you grow up hearing about your great-great-grandfather?
Right. So, growing up as a toddler, as a youngster, I was living on Six Nations Reserve, which is my hometown reserve, the reserve that Tom Longboat also grew up on as
Oh,
a
wow.
Onondaga runner. To be clear, Tom is Onondaga, I'm Cayuga, but grew up on the same reserve as him. And at that time, I wasn't really into running, but the family legacy, the history of Tom and his impact on running was passed down to me. And as a little kid, it goes in one ear and goes out the other. But as I got older and started to get into running, I started to, recollect some of the stories and things that, my mother would tell me about Tom or people on Six Nations. And once I kind of got into my own running journey, I kind of, went back to them and started asking them questions about, hey, who exactly was Tom? I started doing my own research and I fell down this big rabbit hole and I got, tons of inspiration from him. And it was kind of just like ever since I kind of started to run later on and I found out about him, it was just like, 0 to 100 right away. So, yeah.
That's great. Tell us about how your running journey started.
Yeah, so growing up, I played hockey mostly, ice hockey. And so during COVID time, hockey was canceled. There wasn't much to do. I was in my undergraduate studies and, I was spending all day indoors just studying, playing video games, just doing things that, like a young teenage guy would do. And so I was like, I want to, get active again. I need to do something. I can't be indoors all day. And so I started to run. And so, one of the reasons I started to run was because during hockey there would be like off ice training. And one of the things you would do is you would go and you would run to get in better shape. Or I had friends who did cross country in high school, and I never did cross country. And the odd time I would go out and I would join them. And I was able to keep up, with these people. And I was like, oh wow, I don't even run. And so I went out, started to run, started with, a few kilometers. And it kind of just became a game from there. It was like, okay, he does three. Now let's see if I can do five, six. Let's build on it. Let's see if I can run a little bit faster this week than I did last week. And it just became a fun game for me. And soon enough, I was, going on Google, asking people and family about who Tom Longboat is. And now I'm on this quest to, follow in his footsteps and, try to, break a 2:24 marathon one day. And so just his story has kind of just, changed my life drastically. And, running has made such a tremendous impact in my life. And it's given me so much purpose and meaning. And I couldn't be more grateful for everything that Tom has done, in the past and, in the present through me. And it's just been great so far.
That is such a cool story. I don't even know who my great grandparents are. So that's so cool. Were you aware? Were you always aware that he was your great grandfather? You were just kind of a kid and not listening about it, or was it something you discovered?
I would, so I would say it's maybe something I discovered. I'm sure I was told when I was younger, but again, I never really put much thought into it. But then, as I got into running, I was like, okay, like who is Kristian? Kristian is the great great grandson of Tom Longboat. And that was a lot of, motivation and inspiration for me because like anything, when you start running, it's not fun. It's not easy in the beginning. It takes, enough time and consistency to, get good enough where you can begin to enjoy running. And so that was one of the things that I was able to use was just, Tom's story and just, in my head as a youngster thinking like, hey, like I got, the legendary bloodline in me. I got these running genes. And so when I was running, when I first started, that was kind of like what, kept me going to a place where I finally began to develop a passion and a love for running. And now it's something that I couldn't see myself, not doing.
How soon within starting running did you realize that you were really good at it? Because you're pretty fast, and I can't imagine that you started and you're running super
Right.
slow. But how quickly did that snap into place?
Yeah, so when I first started to run, like I had no idea of like, what my pace was. I used to use my phone and I'd download one of the running apps to try to, see how fast I was running. And I might have been like just over 5 minutes a kilometer. I know you're in miles, but like maybe when I think I was first starting, I was probably like, 540 a kilometer. So you have to do
Yes,
the math on
like
that.
nine
But
9:30, about 9:30
right.
a mile.
And I wasn't wearing running shoes. I was just wearing just like a basic Adidas shoe that wasn't meant for running. But it was just something I enjoyed. And then I remember one day I told my dad, I'm like, hey, I'm gonna go out for a 10-kilometer run. And I ended up running 30 kilometers. And I had
Wow.
no water. I had like no like fueling source with me because I wasn't planning to do it. I just kind of
Yeah.
was like, I did 10. I felt good. Okay, let's do 15. Okay, you're so close to 20. Let's just do 20. And then from 20, it was like, okay, like let's really see like how we can push ourselves. So and that was a hot summer day too. So it
Yeah.
wasn't a fun
Wow.
run, but I got back from that run and I was like, wow, like I said I was going to do 10 and I did 30. And it just goes to show you, what, the body is capable of. And if you set your mind to something, you can do it. So that moment was a real eye opener for me. And I just started to, from there, I just started to run every day. And I think I was running like up to 20 kilometers a day.
Wow.
Just easy pace, just because I love to do it. I had
Yeah.
no real structure to my training. I was just someone who was like, okay, if you want to get better, you just gotta do more of it. And so it was just like run, run, run. And then, eventually I ended up getting a running coach after running my first marathon. So, like I said, I grew up in Niagara Falls. Well, I grew up in Six Nations, and then we transitioned off of Six Nations Reserve to Niagara Falls. So,
Okay.
Niagara Falls from Six Nations is maybe like an hour, 40 minutes or so. And so in Niagara Falls, there's a marathon every year. They call it the Niagara Ultra. because some years they'll have like an 80K event
Oh,
also a part of it. And so I did the marathon, the 42 kilometers. And at that time, I had, no coach. I don't like to say training because I wasn't training. I was just someone who would just go out and run. But, I went out and I was like, hey, I'd like to do a 4 hour marathon. And so I signed up 3 weeks before. It was kind of a spontaneous thing. All the bibs were sold out. So I was on Facebook trying to find someone who would, send me their bib. And so I ended up getting one. And I ended up running a 3:15 for my first marathon. And I was like, oh, wow, I planned to do 4 hours, did a 3:15. I didn't bonk. And from there, that was kind of like what really kickstarted my running. And I was like, okay, a year from today, I'm going to come back to the same course in my hometown and I'm going to qualify for the Boston Marathon. And fast forward a year later, I was able to do that, and here we are.
what did you run the next year?
So the next year I ran a 2:52. And
Wow.
so the cutoff for my age was 3 hours. Yeah, I ran a 2:52 and was able to, qualify and get entry into Boston. And so yeah.
That is so cool. So Tom Longboat won Boston in 1907. So you ended up running in 2025,
That's right.
over 115 years after, quite a bit of time. What was it like being on the same course, for the most part, the same course, running the same race that your great great grandfather had won?
Yeah. So like first of all, Boston was a completely new experience, like unlike anything I've ever had. Like ever since we landed, we got into the town, just the energy, the vibes, it was crazy and it was really cool. In terms of, running the course, it was such a surreal experience because, you go online, you see these photos of Tom, you see him with these trophies, you see pictures of the streets, and it's like your imagination can only take you so far. And then once you're there in real life and you're kind of like thinking back to all those times you were, doing your research and you were envisioning these moments and it's like now you're actually here. It kind of felt like surreal, like it was a dream and it was just extra special knowing that, when Tom ran, he was 23 years old and I got to run my first Boston at 23 years old and just
Wow.
having the support from, family and friends there, having people from Six Nations Reserve there, having, there were different venues in Boston, like the 26.2 Foundation. They were there, promoting and endorsing, indigenous runners. And
Yeah.
so, having, support from those people and just other, indigenous communities, in the United States who I've never met before, but being able to meet them in Boston, it was just an amazing opportunity to be able to, represent the culture. And it was just, an awesome time. And it was a weekend that I'll never be able to forget. And it's just given me so much motivation now to just continue to work hard in the running and to, be extra disciplined. And now that I have a little bit of taste of it, it just makes me even more hungry to come out next year and just put on a stellar performance on that course. Because, now I know what to expect with that course. And another thing I want to add too was one of the trophies that Tom won from the Boston Marathon. I got to hold it for the first time ever in
That's
Boston,
amazing.
and it was a very surreal, just mesmerizing experience. And it was like a 80-pound trophy. It was super heavy. And I remember
Wow.
after running the race, like I was like dead. So like trying to hold that trophy, like my arms were like cramping up, but it was just so cool to just be able to, hold, that trophy that Tom held. And even going to the
Yeah.
Boston office and just seeing his name, on the platter on the wall with that 2:24 time, it was just everything just felt right. And there were just so many welcoming people there, and it was just a great time.
Wow, that's it. That's amazing. And so he's the only Indigenous Canadian who has ever won the Boston Marathon, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
So over it's been running for 120 some years, and he's the only one. So that's pretty insane. How do you think he would feel about his place in running history?
Yeah, so I mean, it's undisputed. He was, one of the greatest runners of all time. In his current time, I think we could say that he probably was the
Yeah.
greatest runner. So I mean, you can't deny, how great of a athlete he was, and just, given the shoes they were wearing, back then,
Oh
the
yeah.
conditions of the roads, the nutrition they had back then is way different than it was today. Recovery, all of these things is it's so mind-boggling to think about, how he was able to, run so fast on such a fast course. And I always like to think today, like, imagine if we put, Tom or any of these other fast runners in the running shoes they have today, the carbon plated shoes, just how fast they would be, today. And so it feels so cool to kind of be able to, just be able to share and continue a piece of, Canadian history. And, I'll never be as great of a runner as Tom Longboat. And, that's not the goal for me. The goal is just to simply, to share the message to, promote running. And it's changed my life in so many ways. And I know that it can change so many other people's lives. And it's just, I'm on a quest to, follow in his footsteps the best that I can. And, try to, proceed with each marathon and get a little bit faster and run some of the races that he's run. So Boston was one of them. There's a 30K race in Hamilton here close by around the bay that he won right before he went to Boston, and so that's on the bucket list for me as well. I've ran that twice so far, and each year I've made steady progress towards that. So it's just awesome to be able to kind of give people inspiration and hope and just give family back home on Six Nations Reserve something to root for. That's honestly what it's all about.
That's so cool. And I love this story. This is so cool. Um, so we're all dying to know how did your finish at the 2025 Boston compared to the 224 that Tom Longboat ran in 1907?
Yeah, this is a very touchy subject for me just because so I finished Boston with a 307.
Okay,
Um Not happy with it if we're being fully transparent.
that's
But
okay.
it's okay though. It was a big learning experience and I always know that there's always going to be another marathon and there's going to be so many more opportunities to run Boston. So we're going to take the 307 time and we're going to go back to the drawing board and me and my coach are going to look at what we need to do moving forward to get a better result. Going into Boston, the goal was to run a sub 240 marathon, which that's a big difference. That's,
Yeah,
20 plus minute difference. And so, one of the reasons why, 239 was the goal was, 3 weeks before Boston, I did a 30K around the Bay race. That's one of the races that, put, Tom, in the public eye, when he won that race. It's a very hilly race. And so that was a perfect training race for Boston. And I ran the 30K and I think it was an hour 49. So that's like a 3:36 kilometer pace. And so given those metrics, that would say, hey, Kristian is in the fitness to run a 2:39 in Boston or like a 2:36 on a flat course. And so that was why 2:39 was the goal. Unfortunately, after that 30K race, I ended up getting bad shin splint. I was supposed to run that 30K as a training race. I didn't, he goes out hard and gives it all he has. And so, but that's a part of, becoming an experienced runner and learning is knowing when to, push and when to hold back and when to not,
absolutely.
let your pride get in the way and stuff like that. It's a continuous learning process. That was like only my, fourth, I think, running event, in all the running races I've done. So I'm still learning. And so went to Boston dealing with this shin splint. those 3 weeks leading up, I was just cycling on a bike, just trying to maintain the aerobic fitness. And then um, once the race started, shin was still, aggravating me a little bit, but I was trying to put that in the back of my head. And then midway through, like halfway through the race, my legs, they started to fatigue. The muscular endurance was not there just from being, sedentary and not running, the weeks leading up. And so it was yeah, I just the cardio was there, but the legs weren't. And so I was like, okay, you're not gonna hit your goal, but we're not gonna stop running no matter what. We're just gonna keep, chugging away through it. And it was a good, learning lesson in terms of, mentality wise. Just not being discouraged, keeping, a good head on your shoulders and saying, hey, today is not your A day. It's a very important day. It's not your A day, but it's okay. Because there's always going to be another opportunity to do so. And I think that's one of the biggest, takeaways that anyone can take away, not just from running, but in life in general, is your mindset and your attitude towards something. And I truly believe that there will be another opportunity to, showcase, my running abilities. And I truly believe I'll be able to go back to Boston in 2026, or yeah, 2026, and run, a sub 240 marathon. I truly believe that. And so I can't wait to be able to showcase that. But yeah, it was a great time nonetheless. And one thing I realized that, it really wasn't about, my finish time in Boston. It was just about Kristian going, continuing on, the tradition of, someone in the Longboat lineage, a next generation member going and running those streets. And, like I said, I'll never be as great as Tom, but that's okay. And it's just, keeping that indigenous history and running alive. And I feel like I was able to do that. To at least I tried to the best of my ability. And I'm just super excited and, grateful for that. And I can't wait for what the future holds in terms of running for me.
That's great. Now, sounds like it was a tough race. While you were out on the course and
Yeah.
having trouble, were you thinking about your great great grandfather and his experience there, or were you more in survival mode?
Of course. So it was like a back and forth. So yeah, I was in survival. So like the first half of the race, it was good for the most part. I knew pretty early on, okay, Kristian, you're not gonna hit the 240 goal. Like I knew that, but I was like, let's still give a good effort and just let's enjoy the energy and the crowd and the vibes because I've never done, a major event like this where there's just, people cheering and screaming the entire way. And I was my running singlet, it said Canada on it. And so people in the crowd were like, go Canada, go Canada. And so, that was extra motivation and that was, just great to see and have. And but as I was going up those Newton hills and my legs were dead and I wanted to stop, I was like, it just gave me so much more respect for Tom and his capabilities. I was like, this man was just on another level, just being able to run those hills, in those shoes in those conditions. And I was like, it just goes to show you like just how great he was and just, all the other runners who were running, at a similar time as him. I think it's important that, we also, give a shout out to those runners as well who were, up there back then. But yeah, he was with me the entire way. And in those moments when I wanted to stop and just walk, it was like, no, Kristian, you can't do this. Like, don't do it for you, do it for that part of Tom, I know Tom has that warrior, mentality in him. That's what got him all these wins and the success in running. And it's like, okay, Kristian, you need to have a little bit of that warrior mentality in you. And so it's like in my head, I'm going back and I'm thinking of Tom and I'm, visualizing him running and, kind of like a third person view, him from above seeing me running. And it's like, okay, like, don't stop, keep going. It's painful now, but it won't be once you cross that finish line, all that pain will just flush away and you'll just be riding the high of happiness. So, Yeah, he was definitely there, for a large part of that race. And, he always is there, just even for, not Boston, but all the other marathons I'm going to do. When those, brutal times come and you're cramping or you're bonking and you want to stop and you're asking yourself, why am I doing this? It feels really good knowing that you're doing it for a bigger reason and a bigger purpose. And I can just draw so much power and motivation from that. And Tom has just played such a big role, a part of that. And he's become a role model, and he's just become an idol and someone that I look up to. And it just makes me feel really proud that I can, continue this running, journey and just be the next generation to do so.
Wow, that's great. So it sounds like you have no plans of stopping. So final question.
Yeah.
Um, what will be your next step? What's the next race coming up?
That's a great question. So there's actually a 10K race on the Toronto Island. And so that's September 7th. And so I've never done a shorter distance race like a 10K, but I was invited out to that race by the Longboat Running Club in Toronto.
Oh, wow.
So I'm going to be, racing that 10K on Toronto Island September 7th. And then I'm going to be doing it used to be the International Niagara Falls Marathon. I don't think it's international anymore, but the Niagara Falls Marathon, that's October 26th. And so that's the course I plan to run sub 240 in, plan to win that marathon. I know that's an ambitious goal, but I love setting really high goals for myself and it just motivates me to push myself as far as I can. So goals to win that race, qualify for Boston there and just, continue, with this running journey. So that race is October 26th. If anybody is interested, um, September 7th, 10K, and October 26th. And so this summer I'm dedicating to running, to training. Currently, I'm running twice a day, 20 kilometers a day, morning run, evening run. And so I'm just using the summer opportunity to get in the best shape I can and prepare for the fall season. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, Christian, thank you so much. We cannot wait to see everything you do. I have no doubt in my mind that you are going to have so much success with all of this, and I really appreciate you joining the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Hillary. It's been a blast speaking to you and meeting you and just having this opportunity to reach a new demographic. And I hope to inspire or motivate at least one person out there. And it was a pleasure speaking to you. So thank you so much.
In addition to his descendants carrying on his tradition as a runner, Tom Longboat's legacy includes an award in his name. The Longboat Awards, presented each year to one female and one male winner, recognize Indigenous athletes for their outstanding contributions to sport in Canada. His legacy also includes the Longboat Roadrunners, one of the oldest running clubs in the GTA. And it includes Ontario's Tom Longboat Day, created in 2008 to recognize his birthday, but held on June 4th because once again, someone got the date wrong. Today, it's up to us to preserve Longboat's story, and I am so glad to see people like Kristian and groups like the Aboriginal Sports Circle ensuring that he is remembered for decades to come. That is all that I have for y'all today, but tune in tomorrow as we travel exactly 100 years forward to meet one of the best female distance runners of the 1980s. I'm your host, Running Up That Hillary, and this has been Today in Running History. When the group reached No, god damn it. When the group We could probably have more bloopers in this one, because here we are. When the group Oh my god. She sells seashells.